If NFL QBs were musical artists, who would each one be? That is the bizarre question that we will be answering today. I don't have any hard-hitting analysis for you. I just wanted to have a little bit of fun, so without further ado, quick timeout. I do have to give a few caveats. Number one, I'm only going to be using players that are actively in the NFL. So even though Tom Brady did retire just last year, he won't be used in this video. Number two, I also didn't use every single quarterback in the NFL because not everyone has a one-to-one comparison. And honestly, of the guys that I did select, I probably made some mistakes here. So if you have any disagreements at all, I would love to hear what you have to say in the comments. But again, it's not that serious. Let's have some fun. We're gonna start off with Dak Prescott, who I think is consistently one of the most overhated quarterbacks in the NFL. And a common criticism, of course, is that he throws a lot of interceptions, even though the Cowboys consistently have a top 5 offense when he's on the field. But Dak does have plenty of diehard Cowboys fans that are more than willing to go to bat for him. And I honestly can't think of a more appropriate comparison. This one might be the one that I'm most proud of. For someone to have a ton of haters, but also a ton of diehard fans that support them, that's Taylor Swift all damn day. They're both objectively great at what they do, and the rational people realize that. There's the diehard fans that are so over the edge, and then there are the haters that are so unbelievably over the edge. But even though both of those groups are a little bit over the edge, the diehard fans are more right than the haters. I've got to say that much. So Dak Prescott is Taylor Swift. But now we're going to move on to Lamar Jackson, who you all know that I love.
Hey,
and
man, did you know that it's just one guy?
What?
Did you know that? Did you know that it's just one guy?
Bro,
it's
what do
just him. Did you know that? You didn't know. You didn't know that it was just one guy.
Bro,
it's just Lamar Jackson out there.
Bro, stop. That was my awful attempt at an impression of a cringy Tame Impala fan, because that's my comparison for Lamar Jackson. Because it really is just him out there. Sometimes it feels like the play calling's been terrible. The receivers have been terrible. They've been banged up. It's like when he's on the field, though, there's still somehow a playoff team every year. Tame Impala, Lamar Jackson, that's your comparison. Now, as we move on to Jacoby Brissett, I will make a point here that a big reason why I didn't include every quarterback here is because a lot of the low-tier starters are just not that interesting. But Brissett is different because he's such a high-tier backup that he ends up pretty much being just a mid-tier starter. And for that reason, he's Rick Ross, who in my opinion is the best feature artist in all of modern hip hop, no doubt about it. And you're thinking there's no way that can be true, but I promise you, just look up every song featuring Rick Ross, they're all bangers. You could easily make an album of just Rick Ross features and it would go platinum. I'm not a huge fan of a lot of his solo stuff, but the features are just perfect. And that's Jacoby Brissett. Maybe not a franchise quarterback, but if you need a solid backup, you need him in a pinch, he's your guy. And now we're moving on to a quarterback that you all know that I love, Jalen Hurts, starting his career at Alabama, not really being able to hit the broadside of a barn, was perceived pretty much just as a pure power runner at the quarterback position. But over the years, he evolved his game to the point where he was an MVP candidate and in the Super Bowl. And I always make the point, oh, Jalen Hurts always gets better. An artist that has consistently improved year after year is Pusha T. Because early on in Pusha T's career, the perception around him was that he only rapped about one topic. That's what he was known for. And if you know anything about Pusha T, you know what that topic is. But with recent albums like Daytona and It's Almost Dry, we've seen much more creative, much more impressive, and honestly just much more topically interesting songwriting. The growth of Jalen Hurts, the growth of Pusha T, I think that makes them a pretty good match. Now we're moving on to our fifth player, which is Trey Lance. I know what you're thinking. Blaiden, how did you find a comparison for a guy that hasn't played more than 4 games of football since 2019? And it's because when we did see him last at NDSU, it was special, man. And when we hopefully see him again this year, we have high expectations and high hopes that he will perform well. That's Olivia Rodrigo. She dropped the one album, Sour. It was really good, but we haven't had anything since then. And when we do finally get more music from her, we of course are gonna have the expectation that it's going to at least live up to that level. Now with Lance, it is a little bit different because there was the COVID year for football, there was him getting injured, so it would be understandable if he isn't the same player that he at one point maybe could have been. But regardless, for both Rodrigo and for Trey Lance, I have high expectations for their next work. And that brings us to the future of Miami football. Tua, turn the ball. Tua Tagovailoa. The Dolphins quarterback does face some slander for lacking some of the high-end talent that is present in some of the elite quarterbacks of the NFL, but his timing, it's truly elite. It is special. And if you let him sit, draw things out, read you, he will dice you up. So immediately, I'm thinking underappreciated performer that's really good at timing. That's a drummer. And maybe the most underappreciated drummer of my lifetime, at least, is Meg White of the White Stripes. And I didn't even realize this. So actually, I have to give credit to my friend Max for pointing this out, that people did not think that Meg was a good drummer for the White Stripes. And that's because everyone's so used to these intricate drum fills, but I think sometimes you just gotta be like Ringo Starr, man, for the Beatles. You just sit in and hold down the fort. And just like Meg White, Tua embodies that do your job, stay in your role. It doesn't always have to be this super elaborate highlight play for you to be a good player. This next one is a shout out to one of my favorite co-hosts of all time, Matthew Spawnhour, as we take a look at Geno Smith and why this man compares to Lana Del Rey. It's really easy to see now how good Geno is, and it's really easy to see now how good Lana is with their recent works, right? Norman fucking Rockwell and the season that Geno just put up. But both of them early on in their careers weren't really taken that seriously. Geno Smith faced some injuries, was a backup for a long time, and Lana, a lot of her early albums and early live performances were met with a lot of criticism. But with Geno Smith being one of the most accurate quarterbacks in the NFL this year, and Lana Del Rey having her recent success, I think that makes them a pretty good match. Now we're finally at Patrick Mahomes, and I know it feels like I'm going in somewhat of a random order, but I promise you that it's not random. We're actually going in reverse alphabetical order by artist. But I think Patrick Mahomes, honestly, is the easiest one here. You know that he's the best quarterback in the NFL. We have the highest expectations for him every single year, and yet no matter what, we're never disappointed. Quite frankly, the only thing that's preventing Patrick Mahomes from being the greatest quarterback of all time is that last word, time. That is obviously Kendrick Lamar, and as someone that has seen both Kendrick and Mahomes live, there is no doubt in my mind that they are easily the best at what they do right now. We're now going to move on to Aaron Rodgers, Aaron, who's kind of an oddball character, but is incredibly talented, and you would be hard-pressed to find pretty much any moment throughout his career in which he performed poorly. This is another one that I feel is kind of obvious. Josh Homme, the frontman for Queens of the Stone Age. Now, if you follow me on Twitter, you know that I actually saw them play live recently. And there was a point after their first couple of songs, Josh Homme is starting to introduce the band because no one in the band outside of him has been around for every single album. So obviously he's making sure the crowd is familiar with who's playing. So he finishes introducing everyone and what instrument they play, and they're all like pointing at him, and he's like, "Oh, yes, and I'm Joshua. I'm your guidance counselor." And I'm pretty sure I would be equally comfortable with Aaron Rodgers and Josh Homme being my guidance counselor. So it's also interesting, and I'm like 99% sure of this, that no one Aaron Rodgers started his career with was around when he finished his time in Green Bay. Just like how Queens of the Stone Age is never the same band except for Josh Homme. Now, next up on my list here is supposed to be Trevor Lawrence, but it makes more sense if I do Justin Herbert first. So we're gonna do Justin Herbert. It's gonna be a little bit out of order for those that have been trying to follow along in reverse alphabetical order by artist. And then we'll do Trevor Lawrence, and then we'll continue with the rest of the order. But these two kind of have to go back to back. So Justin Herbert is arguably one of the most precise quarterbacks in the NFL, with a rocket for an arm, sitting on top of a massive 6'6" frame. And it feels like every year I look through his end of year highlights and I'm like, wow, yeah, there's 4 throws in here that are the best throws I've ever seen. This is where I'm gonna turn into a little bit of a guitar nerd. Justin Herbert is Jason Becker. If you're unfamiliar with Jason Becker, I highly recommend that you look him up. Not only is he a great guitar player, he has a fantastic story. He got ALS when he was really young, and he was only supposed to live a few years after that, but now he's almost 60 years old. Sadly, he has lost the ability to play guitar physically, but he is still widely considered as one of the greatest guitar players of this generation, if not of all time. I consider him to have a PhD in guitar playing in a similar way that I consider Herbert to almost have a PhD in throwing a football. And it is certainly no coincidence that Jason Becker has some of the most prolific and impressive guitar solos of all time. Now that we've established the Herbert-Jason Becker comparison, I can now talk about Trevor Lawrence. Because honestly, Trevor Lawrence has a lot of the same physical capabilities as Herbert. He has the size, he has the arm, the pocket presence is elite. He's just not quite as tightly wound as Herbert is. So I'm going to go with another all-time great guitar player, just not someone on the level of Becker or Marty Friedman or Steve Vai. So I'm giving Trevor Lawrence the Jimmy Page comparison, and it's interesting because Page often gets criticized for being a sloppy guitar player, which I don't know how much I buy into that, but sure. So those are the two guitar players that I'm gonna bring up. You won't hear any more about it for the rest of the video. And now we're moving on to the savior of Cincinnati himself, Joe Shiesty, Joe Burrow, who is kind of the chosen one. I mean, everything he has done to this point has been done extremely well. In high school, he was Ohio's Mr. Football. He was first team All-State. Obviously, after transferring from Ohio State to LSU, he was phenomenal. And then he goes to the Bengals as the clear #1 overall pick and lives up to every expectation. It feels like the moment that Joe Burrow stepped on a football field, he was destined to be amazing at it. Just like Jay-Z. You have Reasonable Doubt, you have Blueprint, you have the Black Album, American Gangster, Magna Carta, Watch the Throne, and then you of course have the Apology album 444. It feels like every major project that Jay-Z did was wildly successful, and it's no surprise that he's a billionaire and is widely considered to be one of the greatest hip-hop artists of all time. And thus it should be no surprise that I chose him to be our musical comparison for Joe Burrow. So we've made it through 12 guys so far, and I have 21 on my list, which means we are over halfway done, but we're actually further along than you think, because the next 4 guys are actually going to go together in one group. We're doing Ryan Tannehill, Kirk Cousins, Jared Goff, and Jimmy Garoppolo. None of these guys ever really elevated to a spectacular superstar level, but they've all been pretty okay. By all accounts, you could consider them the high council of mid-tier starting quarterback play. Hence, they are Imagine Dragons. I think that's simple enough. We can move on to Matthew Stafford. This is another one that I'm really proud of. Matthew Stafford, as a Detroit Lion, had some success. They did go to the playoffs, but they could never really become a really great team. And that's not really to any fault of Stafford. So it got to a point he left. There was only so far he could get in his career in Detroit. So he goes to the Rams and is instantly more successful. This is Harry Styles. Like, One Direction was successful, but when Harry Styles started releasing his own music as a solo act, he was almost instantly the most popular artist in the world. We've got 4 more left, starting with Russell Wilson. This is Drake. Drake? That's Drake. Russ? Like, it's Drake. Both of them are corny as hell. They both had a really good stretch through the early to mid 2010s, and now they're both quite mid. And that brings us to Baker Mayfield, who set our expectations really sky high with his first few seasons, but never really evolved. Like, he had talent, he had the system around him to be successful, but he just kind of stayed the same. And that is DaBaby in a nutshell. I mean, how many times have you heard that DaBaby is only elite when he's on a beat that isn't his own? It is kind of true, and it's similar with Baker. Like, you have the talent, you have the competitiveness, but for some reason, you just can't seem to bring it together with the technical stuff. And if you thought Baker Mayfield was off the rails, then you obviously haven't heard of Carson Wentz, because if he made music, he would be Chief Keef. Bro has some bangers, I'm not gonna lie. Carson Wentz, he was a dog at one point. It was highlight play after highlight play after highlight play. There was a time when Carson Wentz would pull through, but we're to a point now where I can't rely on you to be consistently good. You're just too volatile. And thus, if he made music, he would be Chief Keef. And that brings us to the last quarterback on our list, which is Josh Allen. Now, we've talked about a lot of super talented, superstar quarterbacks: Lamar, Jalen Hurts, Patrick Mahomes, Justin Herbert, and Josh Allen is absolutely up there with some of the best in the league right now. But there is concern that Josh Allen only has one setting and that he can only operate in one style, which is hero ball. Or at least that's the style that he can operate in consistently, because we've seen him be precise and efficient before, just not for long stretches. So to me, if Josh Allen were to be a musical artist, he would be Billie Eilish. And if you know anything about me, you know I love Billie Eilish. I think she has an amazing voice. She's super talented. Her songs are amazing. But just like Josh Allen, there's the question, do you have that other mode? Like, we know you're capable of it. We know you're plenty talented. But when you're not objectively the best, like a Patrick Mahomes, people are gonna find ways to critique and criticize. Josh Allen is great. Billie Eilish is great. And the one criticism that people have managed to come up with seems to be relatively the same between them. But that wraps up all 21 quarterbacks and the musical artist pairing that I was able to figure out. This was a ton of fun to make. I hope you all enjoyed this. If you would like to see more videos like this, make sure you leave a comment. Let me know what you would like to see. I'm going to be working on some more heavier analysis videos as well. But until then, I appreciate y'all tuning in. It means a lot. And as always, I'll catch you guys on the flippity flop.